program is from NET, the National Educational Television Network.
I'd like to live in a tree-lined street. I'd like to have a summer home on the lake. I'd like to have a yacht and belong to a North Shore Yacht Club. I like to wear suits from Brooks Brothers. All Americans, and I am an American, we think this way. There's no other way to think. I can't think African. I can't think Irish. I can't think Norwegian. I have to think in the society in which I live, which is a white society. So their values are imposed on me, and I think this kind of way. I don't think of myself as being a Negro. Never, until recently, have I really been concerned that I am a Negro. I thought all the while that I was an American.
Interesting commentary on this in Life magazine several years ago when they had the sit-ins on Route 40 to try to stamp out discrimination. And they had asked a lady there who ran just a hash joint almost, why she discriminated against all of these black people when some of them were diplomats from African nations. And her comment was simply that they all looked like just plain run-of-the-mill niggas to her.
This is Robert Jones, age 38, native-born American. He holds down an important job, owns a yacht that sleeps 8, and vacations each summer on fashionable Martha's Vineyard. He, his wife Marlene, and their 2 children live on a tree-lined suburban street just across the Hudson River from New York City. Bobby Jones, as his friends call him, is a graduate of New York University with a law degree from New York Law School. He and his family are among some 5 million members of a unique and little-known group in the United States, the Negro middle class. Bobby Jones and his counterparts are to be found in every state of the Union. 1 out of every 4 Negro families can be said to be middle class today, which is better than twice the figure of only 10 years ago. Most are still on the lower middle income rungs in the $7,000 to $15,000 a year category, though others, such as Bobby Jones, do much better. This is not to say, however, that the millennium has come. According to the United States Department of Labor Statistics, Negro median income is still little better than half that of whites, and whites' income is increasing at a faster rate. Moreover, 1/10 of all white families now have incomes in excess of $15,000 a year. Only 1 in 40 Negro families does as well. But there are increasing numbers of Negroes whose incomes are rising as their qualifications multiply and racial barriers to their advancement slowly lessen.
What I'd like to do is to get a complete and thorough review of this to make sure that we have everything in there. And at the same time,
Bobby Jones, whose father was a post office worker in Boston, supervises a staff of 50, mostly whites.
Inherent in the model cities staffing and budget items, we have included rehabilitation specialists. We have.
But does income alone determine what is understood by the term middle class?
Called the American sense, which implies a style of life.
Dr. St. Clair Drake, sociologist. from Roosevelt University in Chicago.
I tended to conceptualize class that way myself. One of the ways I like to think about it is this. Some years ago, when Horace Caton and I were working on Black Metropolis, we were suddenly struck by the fact that you could find two Negroes who worked in the stockyards as what we used to like to call cattle eviscerators, taking out the insides of the cattle as they came along on the assembly line. And let us assume that both of them were making about $400 a month. One comes home and on the way home stops by the local tavern, imbibes a good bit of alcohol. By the time he gets home, he's in a very bad mood. He knocks on the door and it isn't opened quickly. He yells up at his wife and she sticks her head out the window and curses him, and then everybody up and down the street begins to throw up the windows and look. She comes out and he beats her, and they finally get on in the house, and they both start taking their drinks, and the fight goes on. Now the other man takes his 400 and he passes the bar, turning his head the other way, and when he arrives at home, his wife also doesn't open the door quickly enough. But he waits until he gets inside, and then the fight starts inside. And when he gets ready to beat her, he pulls down the shades to make sure that the neighbors don't see. And then having got that part of it over, they sit down at the kitchen table and decide how much of the money they're going to put aside for the educational fund for the kids, and how much they're going to put in church next Sunday. And this is the end of the day. We call the second a middle-class way of life, and the first a lower-class way of life. The point I was trying to make was they both might have the same amount of money, but the way in which they behave, the aspirations they have for themselves and their children differ. And therefore, money alone, as we would see it, doesn't make one middle class. Now, if you want to look at American society in three levels, say an upper, a middle, and a lower class, you might peg it this way. An upper class puts the emphasis on refinement, the middle class on respectability, and the lower class on survival.
Middle-class lifestyle, however, would be rather difficult to arrive at and to maintain were it not for some economic basis that is more than minimal.
I've never really thought of myself as middle class. I said I'm not trying to be facetious, but there are the differences, and I don't think that that I can overlook these or gloss over these by saying they don't exist. What are they? Well, the fact that I have a job to go to every day and a responsibility to discharge with respect to that job, I think is a basic difference, because there are people that are demonstrating for rights that have not a job, and that for them this is most crucial, because they can't feed their families, and I can feed mine. They can't draw a paycheck down, and I can, and this gives a certain pride and respect to the individual that I don't think they can have.
What happens if a middle-class Negro loses his job?
Economically, he's no longer middle class. He's unemployed, and that's an interesting fact. This Negro middle class that we're talking about is a very, very precarious thing. Someone who came out of teaching, who can get a job perhaps with the Job Corps or with some other teaching-oriented kind of occupation, can go from $7,000 a year 1 year to $15,000 or $18,000 a year with some of the anti-poverty programs the next year. Of course, if he lives up to this $15,000 or $18,000 a year and his project is not refunded, he's no longer middle class.
Still, for those who customarily think of nearly all Negroes as being near the poverty level, the present picture in jobs, business, housing, and social activity within the Negro middle class is a striking one. Richard Clark, owner-manager of a New York personnel consultants firm, says he's in the business of creating instant middle-class Negroes by finding them white-collar jobs.
It's called a Job Opportunity Center, and we've brought together 750 Negro college graduates, one-third of whom are June 1967 graduates, and the other two-thirds experienced people who were disillusioned with the level of jobs that they hold. There are 120 interviewers here representing 33 different companies who have in mind employment. I think it's an interesting paradox that at the time that people are concerned about race rioting and looting and burning and things of this kind, that over 750 to 1,000 Negroes will be marching into this place quietly, not protesting, not rioting, not burning, not looting, but looking for an economic chance in the mainstream of American life. In a manner of speaking, we're involved in a sort of a mass token acceptance kind of a thing.
Equality of job opportunity cannot be taken for granted, however, nor can promotions. Current median income for Negro college graduates is just under $6,000. The white graduate earns over $9,000. But what of Negro-owned and operated businesses? Are they, as some observers charge, threatened with decline?
I know there are some people who have said that there are less or fewer Negro businesses today than there were 20 years ago. I think if we think in terms of large numbers of people in business, perhaps this may be true. But I think Negroes are engaged in bigger businesses. They are doing larger volumes of business. I think they are in more diversified businesses. I think all you have to do is read Ebony magazine and see all the kinds of businesses that Negroes are in.
Governor Kerner, I'd like to know if you attend.
Yes, I will be there. I remembered that I was supposed to go, so I will be there. Okay, you can call them and tell them that I'll be there. Dear Jeff, this is just a little note to tell you how sorry we are that you will be leaving the Home Office to take up your duties as Vice President.
The Johnson Publishing Company of Chicago is one of the country's most successful Negro business firms, with gross advertising revenues running into the millions. Its 250 employees, including a few whites, engage in a coast-to-coast operation.
I also want to say that he plays an excellent game of poker, and I just told Louis Robinson, who called me, that Jeff would be out there and to get the boys ready for it.
Negro business in general, however, remains in the small business category. Discrimination by lenders, suppliers, and insurance companies often makes their success a precarious one, especially now that many larger white firms have recently discovered the $32 billion Negro market under their very noses. Aspirations among Negroes are often centered on better housing, to an extent which frequently outrivals those of their white counterparts. Atlanta, Georgia's flourishing Negro middle class is widely noted for its extensive and highly status-conscious new development areas, such as this one in the prestigious Collier Heights section, built and financed by local Negro businessmen. In the past, white banks traditionally turned down Negro loan applications. Eventually, black institutions pooled their resources and moved into the vacuum. Today, Atlanta white firms are belatedly trying to outbid black banks and black contractors for a share of one of the fastest growing markets in town. But whether they seek private houses or high-rise apartments, such as in these Chicago cooperatives, most Negro home seekers still find themselves barred from all but largely segregated areas. Even those who could afford better are often trapped in substandard, overcrowded units, while such better housing as does become available is swamped with frustrated applicants, who also seek quality education for their children. No matter where they live or with whom they work, when it comes to social activity, most Negro Americans, frozen out of the white mainstream, constitute a veritable society within a society, largely paralleling but separate from the various levels of social structure found among whites. This Waldorf Astoria debutante cotillion, given semi-annually by the New York chapter of a leading Negro women's club called the Girlfriends, is virtually identical to those held here by white groups, save for color.
The white cotillions, they have their junior leagues,
Of course, you know there is no colored junior league. Well, the Girlfriends is a very friendly group of girls. They do charitable work, civic work, and it's a social group. I have a lot of white friends, and I think the ones that I have, they like me as me, and they like to work along with me. But I don't think that they want to particularly invite me to their homes, to their parties, which is perfectly all right with me.
And you wouldn't want to go?
No. I mean, their friends and I probably wouldn't have anything in common, and we probably would. We don't know that. Wow. We meet together on certain bases, but I don't expect to be invited to their parties, and I'm sure they wouldn't enjoy coming to mine.
In recent years, however, there has been some increase in integrated social affairs, such as at the annual Evening of Elegance held last summer at Mrs. Sidney Poitier's Westchester estate. Invited guests paid $60 per couple for an elaborate evening of cocktails, dining, and dancing.
I think that many people in this country who are white, they come in contact with Negroes through advisory boards and benefit committees, and this in itself brings about a certain amount of communication. People can sit down over a cocktail and talk about the world's problems. This in itself is a form of dovetailing into society, into the mainstream. These are the people who are called upon to contribute to every cause, to every organization, to every social agency. $100 a ticket for this, $200 for that, for a couple to go somewhere for the benefit of someone else. The entire involvement of these groups involves participation and giving of themselves, of their money, of their time to those less fortunate than they. In this respect, yes, there is a Negro society.
Man, when I take my family on a vacation, we want to relax. We don't want any problems with prejudiced white folks. So we go where we know we won't be bothered.
That may be down home to visit the family, up to Canada or Cape Cod, or even abroad to Europe or Africa. One popular vacation spot among Negroes is the resort town of Oak Bluff, Massachusetts, situated on Martha's Vineyard, an island just off Cape Cod. For fun and relaxation, thousands journey here each summer from all over the country, forming a sizable Negro colony which gets along with, but keeps somewhat aloof from, local and vacationing whites. Doctors, teachers, and other professionals are prominent, and many have bought and maintained summer homes for their wives and children.
Okay, guys, there.
Weekend parties at places such as Sag Harbor on New York's Long Island are a specialty of Eastern club and fraternal groups, still barred from membership at most country clubs and disgusted with attitudes at resort hotels in the Catskills, Miami Beach, and other holiday spots. Some club members fly into such private parties from other cities to claim their place in the sun. Not all Negroes are pleased with the Negro middle class, however.
In my mind, there is no black middle class. It's impossible for it to exist in this country. We have those who aspire to be middle class. And to that group, I would say that they have been almost totally, 99% negligent in their response to the struggles of the masses of black people in this country, and that they have, in many instances, in fact, hindered that struggle by moderating the genuine and legitimate radicalism of the masses.
White-collar Negroes today sometimes find themselves under attack from within their own ranks. Last summer's Evening of Elegance was harshly criticized in some quarters, particularly since it took place only 2 nights after the New York riots. Observers sensed an uneasiness on the part of some guests. Basil Thomas, organizer of the affair, gives his own assessment.
This is completely social even. It's not a part of any civil rights organization. We don't propose to. We don't have speeches politically, civil rights, or any other type of controversies.
And yet, in your way, you do make a contribution in that.
Completely in sympathy with it. Completely in sympathy with it. But I certainly would not like it to disrupt the beauty of the evening of elegance. We have so many charming and responsible ladies and gentlemen here tonight, and I thought certainly that I could not expect the public to come to an affair and pay unless it were done for one or another worthy cause. And I might say that I'm delighted that the Urban League of Greater New York has permitted me to use their fabulous name. We choose a certain organization or a certain charity each year, and after it has been chosen, we work like the Dickens to try to bring in some sort of support. But the evening itself is so lavishly done, there's so much money put into the promotion of the evening of elegance that there isn't too much going to the particular charity that has been chosen.
Though other ethnic groups also have their class structures, sensitive Negroes find themselves caught in an awkward dilemma between desires to exercise usual middle-class behavior on the one hand and ever-present reminders of their less fortunate brothers on the other. The soul-searching goes on.
I guess it's clear to see now that the Negro who is truly struggling looks askance at us. They are the upper middle class, or the middle class. They don't understand our problems. We don't need them. They're of a dying era. The Roy Wilkins and the Whitney Youngs and the Philip Randolph, possibly. We don't understand, and they don't understand it. I don't know where it's going to lead to. For instance, myself. I'm born and reared in New York, always having been in a kind of a middle-class structure. Never suffered too terribly. Went to integrated schools, got an education in the New York school system, a college education. At 17, I dated white girls. There was some displeasure at it, but I did it, and I had no guilt about it. For some reason or the other, I never associated myself with the welfare recipient, the unemployed person. And now I realize that these are my people, that I should be able to do something for them or with them. But yet I haven't. So that, I think, is where the guilt comes in. I have empathy for my people, but yet in my middle class value, I still kind of think of them as those people. And I'm aware of it, and I think a lot of people in my particular class, if you will, is aware of it, but we're reluctant. We are just imbued with this white middle class value where we think white. So I take the position that these people have been denied, and I continue to say these people. Notice that. I continue to say these people. And like I'm not one of them, when in fact I am one of them. I take the position now that I should help. I should do what I can. I have begun to protest. I will now picket. I will now speak out with my white counterpart about the injustices that have occurred to my people, when before, say, 15 years ago, I kind of behaved like it didn't exist. But now when I read, when it's brought to the front about housing and about job discrimination, I realize now that this did exist when I was younger, but I was just oblivious to it. I didn't think as a Negro. But now I'm thinking as a Negro. And I think more people in my group are thinking as Negro.
HARU Act at this time is not supposed to have any program.
While the gap still exists, there are those from both groups who realize the necessity of bridging it, such as at this candid committee meeting of HARU, Harlem's anti-poverty agency.
Agree wholeheartedly with the spirit of what Brother Kirby has said. I must point out this for you, though, to us. Let's not make the mistake of confusing HARU Act staff availability with what CDA should provide. Now, the reason we pushed, and I want that to really be pushed, we'll be in Albany tomorrow, so somebody will have to push it here, maybe you, Madam Chairman, CDA to give us the money so you can staff your program so that you'll have staff you can depend on.
Publicist Ophil Dukes, who works in the Vice President's office, volunteers his spare time to work with underprivileged youths in the Washington ghettos.
So we'll try to work out some arrangements to make things very convenient for you. If we can get a few Cadillacs, that would be great.
All time. Well, you know, I don't like no planes and no trains either. I don't like no trains. You know, I was on a train one time and just riding along, you know, and all of a sudden there's a big boom, you know.
What happened?
A plane fell on it, Jim.
I think the one thing that the Negro lacks in terms of his ability to move from one group to another has been his separation from the total middle class, his exclusion from contacts with people who are doing things that he could be inspired to do. I think I can speak with a little authority since I started from the lowest possible class. I was born in Arkansas, and my family came to Chicago in the midst of the Depression in 1933. Our money soon ran out, and we were on the relief rolls. I think that the thing that was most helpful to me in being motivated to move out of one class into another was contact with people in a different class. Fortunately, I worked at an insurance company which had 6 men, Negro men, who were all graduates of leading colleges like Yale and Harvard and Northwestern and the University of Chicago. These men had succeeded in business. They were black men like myself. And so I was able to see from day to day that it was possible to move from one class to another. I don't think we ought to be content just to be in the middle class. I think just as there are whites in the upper class, I think we've got to have Negroes in the upper class.
But the overriding problem faced by Negroes, particularly middle-class Negroes, has been the thwarting by the larger white society of Negro pursuit of the vaunted American dream.
To present to you the President of the United States.
In 1964, President Lyndon Johnson stated a new governmental policy.
It is our task to carry forward nothing less than the full assimilation of more than 20 million Negroes into American life. This is not to be an assimilation of bland conformity. Our object is not to make all people alike. It is, as it has always been, to allow ready access to every blessing of liberty while permitting each to keep his sense of identity with a culture and a tradition.
Despite the fact that he promised no more than that which white Americans automatically take for granted, this still represented the most far-reaching promise to Negroes ever made by any American president. This climaxed a time, beginning with the March on Washington, led by Dr. Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders, when the mood among most Negroes was one of hope, of rising expectations, of a vision of a new and more just relationship between white and black. But a new term was added to the American lexicon, white backlash.
I've read newspaper articles of people, second-generation immigrants, saying, well, my father came here and he didn't have any civil rights bill to help him. What the person forgot was that his father wasn't black. The sociologists have this term high visibility to refer to the fact that you can always see the Negro. He wears his badge of color. European could come speaking a European language. Once he learned English, things were different. He could change his name and take an Anglo-Saxon type name and lose himself in the vast middle class of this country. No matter what the Negro attained in terms of his money or his education, he could not slough off color, and insofar as color was a focal point for prejudice, he was at a competitive disadvantage. And yet one of the great ironies of life in the United States is that white middle-class neighborhoods, without even waiting to see what types of neighbors they are dealing with, have had the tendency to meet the incoming Negro with first, in the old days, with restricted covenants when they were declared unenforceable in the courts, with arson and bombs, and today with the same wall of lack of acceptance, and very often, and this has been proved in those neighborhoods where you have block organizations or groups that have welcomed the new Negro neighbor, very often the new Negro neighbor is more solidly middle class than the white neighbors who try to keep him out. Families who themselves have only become middle class in the last generation, very often immigrant families who cannot even speak a variety of English as impeccable as the English which the new Negro neighbor has, have reacted with violence and with fury in order to try to prevent Negro neighbors from coming in. And this perhaps is one of the greatest tragedies of the Negro middle class, that its aspirations are blocked with respect to living in those kinds of neighborhoods where one can live a middle-class style of life most effectively. The most extreme form of this, of course, is in the suburban areas. And if any of the problems of the inner city are going to be solved, as well as the problems of the Negro middle class, the suburban ring around our major cities is going to have to drastically alter its attitude toward the people who are like them in every respect other than the color of their skins.
I was quite shocked at many places. I wanted to see just exactly how the ordinary Negro might be treated in these villages. Oh, I remember at one time I parked at...
Millionaire Chicago scientist Dr. Percy Julian, co-chairman of a committee of Negro businessmen pledged to raise $1 million a year for civil rights goals, tells of a personal experience.
Just gently bumped the back of an automobile of a fellow who was standing there in parking. I bumped his car slightly, and then I jumped out and I said, "Oh, pardon me very much. I wanted to see how he would accept an apology." Well, he called me a three-letter name, and with black in front of it. And I asked him please not to do that. It wasn't necessary. But then he jumped up and ran into a store. "I'm going to call the police. I'm going to call the police." The police came and asked him. He said he wanted to institute a claim for damage. I had damaged his car, and the police tried to see where the damage was. There was no damage. And yet he was just furious. He was... I began to wonder, well, just how deep is the hatred of a person of this sort? I went over that, over and over that experience many, many times. As I went through these suburbs, and I would ask children how many of them had a Negro friend. They would look at me as though they were astonished, and hardly a child I could find who said he had a Negro friend in any of these places. One might say, oh, I know one, and the innocent children. And I realized that really the great impact of the ghetto, the great impact of the philosophy of the actual existence of the untouchable in America, which the Negro represents, that the white child does not know him, and the white child grows up in these insulated villages to come in contact with him later on and to pass judgment on him, to represent him in Congress, to represent him on, to try him on a jury, to send him to the army as a member of a draft board, and they never know him, and they don't know what, all they know is hearsay about him, rumors about him. And this has not been overcome by the large number, even though there are larger numbers of people of goodwill who teach their children the proper things. But there are so many who don't bother to teach their children. And I'm not sure that we can rest comfortably and think that the majority of white Americans have goodwill toward the Negro. Unfortunately, I wish I could keep this dream. But I'm afraid that these experiences to which you refer made me doubt that I could have any such dream as that.
It's a fallacy, you know, for people to say that if a Negro is prepared, if he prepares himself, well, then the opportunities are there. I think the press plays up the appointment of an extremely outstanding Negro to a high-level kind of position. He's probably an extremely capable person who should have been appointed to that position, you know, much sooner than he was. But and this creates the impression that things are better, and they're not. Things are getting worse. And this includes all Negroes, those with degrees, those without. As we work in the Urban League, one of our major efforts is to establish communication between the races and assess the communication that takes place. And this is pretty much our business. And we have noticed particularly, well, I think it comes from Congress. Congress has adopted a hard line, and there's no reason to believe that they're going to change in any way as a result of the hard line that's being adopted by, assumed by America's Negroes, younger Negroes particularly. I think in terms of my own son, who's 17 years old, high school senior, about ready to graduate, and as we discuss philosophies, he says, in effect, that, you know, you can have that Urban League approach, that I'm ready to be a man in America now, that I want full equality with no holds barred. And if I can't have it, no one can have it. And he's an intelligent boy, and in my opinion, a pretty decent boy, a nice boy. But this is his attitude. And this is the attitude of his friends.
Okay, come on, you. Come on! Come on, man! Get off me, man! What the hell is wrong with y'all, man? Come on, man! Get off me!
last summer, the entire nation was made aware of the violence that erupted in Newark, New Jersey. I happened to be attending a National Urban League conference in New York, and my family still lives in Newark. And so I decided to visit them on the way back to Washington. And I visited with my stepfather for about a half hour or so. And we decided to visit with a sister of mine. So as we were going from my stepfather's apartment over to a brother's house to get in his car and go visit a sister who lived in another part of Newark, as we were about to get into the car, about 3 carloads of Newark police came around the corner, and without warning, and to my knowledge, without any provocation from us, opened fire on us and a group of about 40 or 50 people who were standing on the stoop of this apartment building where my brother lived. And my stepfather was mortally wounded, and I had another brother who was wounded twice, who required an operation and extensive hospital care. And we were under fire, I would say, for approximately 10 minutes by the Newark police. They said they were looking for a sniper on the roof or the upper floors of the apartment building, but they were still firing at ground level range. And once we had I had an opportunity to collect my senses and really evaluate and think this thing through. It came through to me in stark reality that regardless of how far up the economic ladder any Negro goes, that there's still this oppressive thing of prejudice that he's subjected to on the part of the white man here in America. And I realized that I was extremely fortunate not to be killed myself. And that even though I possessed 2 degrees, even though I had played football for Syracuse, even though I was an elementary school principal who had educated white children, even though I worked with white people in the Washington Urban League, even though there are white people that I consider close friends, that as the boys say, when it gets down to the nitty-gritty, right down to where it really matters, you're still a Negro, and you're still identified with every other Negro in America, be he in a ghetto or in a suburban neighborhood. You're still a brother. And I think we just have to recognize this.
Hurry up, boy. You hear what I said? Brenham. Right there. You got it, boy.
A failure of communications has often been cited as an important factor in racial difficulties. But some Negro observers say the failure is actually one way. Many whites simply refuse to listen to what they do not wish to hear.
And if I read history right, all the talk about chattel slavery and whatnot led up to a climax.
around. However much we may disagree with some impulsive statements of the Rap Browns, we are not going to render them up as sacrificial lambs to these racist oppressors. And the masses of the Afro-American people are going to stand behind them.
But you can't advocate violence with Rap Brown and all, and go burn down a whole state and move on to burn down another state.
I am not advocating violence, but I am not condemning Rap Brown. Rap Brown has guts. I'm not condemning him. I'm not condemning.
That's providing the funds for the party.
I would sooner cut my arm off my body than condemn a militant Afro-American who, however misguided, is challenging the oppressor.
I don't know if I agree with that.
Challenge them. You challenge them the best way you can.
Serious debate concerning tactics, goals, and strategy is commonplace at middle-class Negro gatherings today. While outright violence is generally deplored, there is nevertheless widespread empathy with ghetto rioters as having expressed more openly the same pent-up frustrations and resentments they themselves share.
It isn't just a question of jobs, although jobs are important, and that's people have to work and earn. But the masses of the Afro-American people are simply fed up with the situation of prejudice and oppression. They look at themselves and they look at these European American communities with their with all the things that they enjoy, with all their luxuries and whatnot, and beyond all this, they resent this European American looking down their noses at them. It's a revolt for manhood status. They feel that they can't go on this way anymore. Yes, and they're going to do something about it.
As a pacifist, I deplore violence in any form. I make no hesitancy about the fact that I feel that all violence is inimical.
Dr. Nathan Wright, Episcopal clergyman and organizer of the new Black Power Conference, articulates a growing trend among black intellectuals.
But as a historian and as a pragmatist also, I recognize that there's no group of people who have been oppressed who have won their freedom unless they have either believed in actual violence of some kind or have utilized effectively the threat of violence. I would read into the presence of so many middle-class oriented, there aren't any middle-class black people, but middle-class oriented black people at the Black Power Conference as a sign that middle-class black people want to render to this nation and to our world the most basic service that can be rendered at this particularly urgent and perilous hour, and that is of understanding and relating to the desperate needs of the most desperate in our society. And all our black people are militant. All of our black people realize that they are oppressed, and it's simply the press, the public press, that has chosen to identify the philosophy which says that black people should have a sense of being and a sense of control of their own destiny as being an esoteric movement associated with a certain type of so-called radical view. And all black people are radical. Everyone who loves this country is a radical. I think that these people who denounce the materialist values in our culture serve a fundamentally creative purpose. The greatest evil that happened in our city streets this past year was not the destruction of property by people who were driven crazy. And when people are driven crazy, they do crazy things. And in our system of justice, if a person is temporarily insane, he's adjudged, he's not rendered incapable of judgment. And so riots, which are a form of social psychosis, certainly are amoral. They're beyond the realm of moral judgment. But the worst thing that happened was the resort to public massacres as an antidote to the destruction of physical property. Now, no civilized mind could ever equate the value of one human life with 2 stolen bottles of whiskey, a stolen television set, or the destruction of $500 billion worth of property. Now, I've had some religious leaders who have said that we must have order, and I tell them that I may not be an expert on Christianity, but it may be Christianly to kill in a savage way, but it is certainly not civilized for people to equate property values with human life. It is this kind of thing that I think that our black people must repeatedly remind our nation until our barbaric nation realizes the error of its ways.
Traditional religious concepts are also under growing scrutiny by black theologians.
We liberals cannot get very excited over what Stokely called at one time the death of 400 or 500 babies in the city of Birmingham over the year, mainly black babies, for lack of decent medicine and care. But you and I do get terribly excited over in that same city when someone puts a bomb in a church and blows up 2, 3, 4 little children.
For so long, the Negro in America has had a consciousness of a white Christ. Today, as there's a rise in the consciousness of black identity, there are many who are saying that we need a black Christ. And these are black Christians who are saying this because they see that a white Christ is irrelevant to the hopes and aspirations of black people. And so, of course, if we want to speak classically, I would say Christ and the true divinity of Christ knows no color. But in our racist society, he has to take one concrete form to be relevant for either the whites or the blacks in this culture.
Yes, I was at that Black Power conference, as were a number of other black Episcopal priests. And we were not disturbed by this. We expected this, that there would be a rejection of Christianity as a white man's religion, as indeed it is. And it seems to me if we ever are going to solve this question, we're going to have to admit that fact. But we're going to also have to extricate Jesus from this thing, because I don't think he's in that bag at all. It may mean then that Christianity will take a different direction than the white nationalist direction, which unfortunately has taken. It seems to me that my most understanding assessment of situations is always the situation where I'm standing full black nationalist. I'm almost afraid of this business because the danger is that it will usurp my basic faith, which is Christian. It has that kind of excitement and vitality and contagion about it. I really do believe that black nationalism serves a creative purpose in a projected multiracial world, because it seems to me it serves the purpose of confronting white people with what they really are. I don't think they've ever really seen themselves as they are until they see themselves reflected in the mirror of black nationalism. They are frightened by it because they are frightened by themselves. And if this will, as I believe it will, serve the purpose of moving them toward becoming more human, and in other words, if it will move them toward creating an image of themselves that they like better, then we have no need for black nationalism and can ourselves make ourselves over in ways that we like better and which I think would be more human all around. But right now, I think we need the confrontation, and we need all the pressure we can get, and we need to keep that pressure on so that hopefully, and here's where I think I'm optimistic and Christian, hopefully human nature can be reshaped into more viable forms and more viable shapes.
You know, we've
been watching, I feel, if you want to call him the Negro in the street, go through his type of revolution, which is the affirmative, the aggressive, the active revolution. But I think the middle-class Negro has developed to the point where he now is going through what I would consider a mental revolution. He will not participate actively in the streets in terms of the going out and the riots and what have you, but I think these have caused him to do some serious rethinking mentally about the entire process of what's happening, what needs to be done with the Negro in this country, and what role the middle-class Negro is really going to play. And this kind of situation has caused an internal revolution, the mental revolution of the middle-class Negro, which I think is, frankly, it's about time it's happened. It's too important.
A mental revolution. What are its roots? For the first 250 years in America, Negroes were concerned with freeing themselves from physical bonds, though the horrors of American chattel slavery left their scars upon not only the backs, but also the minds of its victims. During slavery, distinctions arose between those who labored in the fields under the overseer's gun and others, often the illegitimate offspring of the slave owner himself, who were favored with servant jobs up at the big house. These house Negroes, as they were called, were sometimes more mentally chained than the field Negroes they were elevated above. From the house Negroes on the plantations and a small artisan and servant group which established itself in the cities, the Negro middle class developed.
Once you have freedom coming in 1865, what you had then is an eruption into the cities of the peasant farming group coming out of the cotton fields, which builds down beneath the emerging middle class, a very large stratum of less sophisticated people with less money and less education, and you now have a mass which really, in many cities, it begins to so outnumber the middle class that it begins to have prejudices itself against these groups of people who act very differently and have different values. Then I think you begin to get something else happening, which has happened with all immigrants who have come to this country, that out of that uneducated, impecunious mass, people begin to get ahead by acquiring some money and education, and their children do also. And so you'd have what might be called the new middle class arising, say, between 1920 and the Second World War. I think this process then got speeded up after the Second World War, partly because of the fact that those who had done Army service had a chance to get a college education or various kinds of technical education through their GI Bill of Rights money, which meant a whole new stratum begins to get an education which hadn't before.
Still, as the outward evidences of physical enslavement were overcome, there often remained the more insidious fact of lingering mental bondage. 20 years ago, Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, Howard University sociologist, critically assessed the Negro middle class and launched upon it a bitter attack which reverberates within the black community to this day. In a controversial book entitled Black Bourgeoisie, Dr. Frazier lacerated white-collar Negroes for what he called aping the surface values of affluent whites. He charged them with living in a dream world of delusions of wealth and power, while rejected by the middle and upper-class whites they sought to emulate, and themselves spurning the black masses with whom they refused to identify. Wrote Dr. Frazier,
having abandoned their social heritage and being rejected by the white world, the black bourgeoisie have an intense feeling of inferiority, constantly seek various forms of recognition, and place great value upon status symbols in order to compensate for their inferiority complex. Since the black bourgeoisie live largely in a world of make-believe, the mask which they wear to play their sorry roles conceal the feelings of inferiority and of insecurity and the frustrations that haunt their inner lives. The black bourgeoisie suffers from nothingness, Because when Negroes attain middle-class status, their lives generally lose both content and significance.
Thus, Frazier saw the Negro middle class as still suffering from that crippling legacy of slavery, as being, in a sense, still mentally enslaved by concepts which defined blacks as inferior and whites as superior. What was needed, Frazier implied, was a breaking of the old mental bonds, an emergence into a new and healthier self-image, as well as a more realistic appraisal of whites as merely fellow human beings of no special significance. What was needed, in short, was a mental revolution.
When I was in high school, I was the only Negro in the whole high school for 2 years. And it was a boarding school, and we would sit in a room, and a boy would get a package from home, a cake or something, and pass it around, and someone would be missed, and he'd say, "What's wrong, am I a nigger?" And I was ashamed of being a nigger, because it meant that I was the one who didn't get the cake, or the nigger was the one who didn't get the cake. But I think I've overcome that. I hope I've overcome that. And I think my participation in the movement helped me overcome it. And I think people who don't have that struggle, that participation in struggle, have more difficulty in overcoming that shame and that fear that living in America, I think, forces on you.
I suppose every Negro, sometimes in his life, has been ashamed of being a Negro. The point is, how long does that feeling last? Can he overcome it? Does it last momentarily, such as ashamed of having exhibited poor manners or a nasty temper? Or does it become a morbid thing with which he lives? I think that's the thing that makes the neurotic or the psychotic. If he can't overcome the feelings of shame, if he can't substitute for these unwelcome feelings of shame, feelings of pride or acceptance. Have you ever stopped to consider the fact that the average Negro child in growing up is exposed almost entirely to Nordic standards of beauty before he ever enters school? As he looks at television, as he looks at the movies, newspapers, he sees Nordic standards of beauty elsewhere, but when he comes home, reflected in the mirror, he sees himself. Now, it's true, anthropologists told us long ago there's no such thing as a pure race, and there are no pure African races, but there is more with which the American Negro can identify when he sees African standards of beauty than, say, in Nordic standards of beauty or Anglo-Saxon.
Now, these signs are a reaction to the detrimental effect which Western civilization and what I call the Manichaean experience has had on black people in America. We are taught, according to the Manichaean experience, that black is ugly, black you get back, black is evil, black people are evil, black women in particular are evil, and this has a deleterious effect on adults, adolescents, and children alike. It makes us ashamed of just being black. There is a bone-deep shame about being black, which pervades the entire black community and has no respect for class. The black bourgeoisie is just as ashamed of being black as are the masses of Negroes. This was done due to a concerted effort over many years and generations by the white propagandists. We intend to counter-propagandize. We intend to tell black people that they are valuable, that they are important, that they have made contributions to the world and will continue to make contributions to the world, but first they must look upon themselves in a better light. Hence, black is not ugly, black is not evil, black is beautiful.
Now, eyes pretty, that's cool. Right there. Okay, that's what I want, see? Nothing to it, just a little smile, and boy, we're on our way, okay? Now chin down just a wee bit. There we are. All right.
I think this trend toward natural hair development indicates a greater feeling of self-pride in Africa and in our African heritage and in blackness, in naturalness, in presenting ourselves and not being ashamed of the way we are. And I think this is a very healthy thing. As a result of our meeting with girls in New York and Chicago and around the country, we found that this trend was developing, not only among women, but also among men. And here again, we felt that Ebony ought to reflect the changes that are going on in the community. And I can say that while it has certainly not affected the majority of people, there are a growing number of Negro men and women who are wearing their hair in a natural form, and I think quite attractively.
One of the great problems that we have faced here in our country is the fact that a lot of black people have not had respect for themselves. We have been, I think, moved and swayed by standards which were not standards of beauty that related to us. And I happen to work for a hair care and cosmetics company. And one of the things that we're taking a long, hard look at, in fact, even more than that we have made decisions to do, is to try to relate beauty among black people as black beauty, and not to try to encourage all women to be blonde. Blonding is for women whose skin tones and natural hair calls for that.
Black people now are proud of being black. They are proud of their hair. When I was a child, I was taught that if a Negro was light complexion and had straight hair, that he was somebody. And I was taught that because I had nappy hair and was black, I was nobody. Young Negroes today are proud of their black skin, they're proud of their nappy hair, and because that's what they are. Now that is new, and to me that is good.
It's beautiful. I think our girls wear it very well. But for our business, it's no good. It's no good for our business. They say blondes have more fun.
Yes. If they requested in my shop, is that what they wanted, I would give it. But I would not recommend it.
Because, why not?
Because the beautician really can't make any money with the natural.
Bad for business.
It's bad for business, yes it is.
This is the purpose of every culture, to service the people who create the culture, whether they happen to be Indians in the Amazon basin or Oxford Dons in London, England, except for the American Negro. His is a slave culture which comes to us from slavery and is perpetuated and was perpetuated by legalized segregation. The white boy, on the other hand, is told, look sharp and do well. You might be president of the most powerful country on earth one day. Now, to the Negro boy, we have the underlying slave culture, since a slave is a dehumanized individual, is that a nigger is no damn good. This is no wonder why very few Negroes, black boys and girls, survive all of this. So it is necessary for us, the present living generation, to create a culture which says that our people are the most valuable. Our boys and girls are beautiful. So that we can overcome the damage done to us as a people and as individuals.
Indigenous Negro music and dance are pursued with new pride and vigor these days, in contrast to the times not long past when such soul expressions were looked down upon as too common for educated Negroes. In fact, the term soul has been virtually commandeered by the black community to describe aspects of black consciousness ranging from the religious to the romantic. Traditional lower-class Negro food favorites, such as pig's feet, collard greens, and chitlins, now known as soul food, also enjoy new and open popularity among soul brothers and soul sisters.
Janet, who won the first prize in the science fair. And she was the one who decided she wanted to include Dr. Charles Drew and Dr. Daniel Hale Williams in her research work. And this was one of the things that made me feel quite proud. That my daughter came home and said she had to turn in a list of 10 famous persons born during the month of February. She showed me the list. There were 10 white persons on it. And I said to her, I said, well, why don't you at least include some famous Negroes? And she said to me, she said, well, Dad, I don't know any famous Negroes. And I wanted to blow my top. What do you mean you don't know any famous Negroes? With all this material I make available to you. So I told her to get busy in the books, to do some research. Then meanwhile, I went back to my library at JET because we do a section called Yesterday in Negro History. And I just simply said to the librarian, a more famous person, Negroes are born during the month of February than any other month. Give me some research to back it up. So I had my little list to be ready for her when she got her little list. And there were names like Langston Hughes, Todd Duncan, Richard Allen, the founder of the Methodist Church, W.E.B. Du Bois, Frederick Douglass, you know, all during the month of February. Now, when she finally got her list together, she gave me 2 lists, famous Negroes, famous whites. And I said, she only wants 10, so why don't you do it in chronological order? When she did it in chronological order, she came up with 7 Negroes and 3 whites, and George Washington didn't make it.
Burgeoning interest in Negro history and African heritage is leading to the growth of museums, libraries, and cultural centers in black neighborhoods across the country. This South Side Chicago Center is dedicated to the Negro fur trader who founded the city in 1779. It is run and supported by a committee of professionals, intellectuals, and white-collar workers who take their work seriously as keepers of the flame.
That we can pledge, and then the committee, or we can empower the development committee to move on in this direction. So Laurent will expand on that idea.
And it seems to me that we have to figure out here and now some other means of getting this $53,000. In fact, we should not leave this meeting unless we see that $53,000, you know, even if various people have to go to their credit unions and borrow some of it.
Since the term Negro is rejected by a growing number of black people today as having a slave system origin, the center's name was recently changed to the Museum of African American History.
Interesting to note that up until about 1812, that early Negro middle class in this country always called itself African. The first societies in this country were the African societies, the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So that they weren't citizens, they weren't a part of this country, and they called themselves African. They would probably have continued to do that if around 1812 the colonization movement had not started, in which eminent people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and others were saying Negroes should be freed, but they should be deported from the United States and sent to Africa. And so you had Liberia established, and you had this great drive to get Negroes out of the country. One finds then the Negro leadership beginning to use the term colored. Colored men's associations replace African societies because people will say, they're African, send them away. I think one of the most interesting things is now, having secured a relatively stable status within the legally within the framework of the U.S., the middle class now does not need to feel insecure about once more accepting an identification with Africa in the same way that Jewish Americans, Polish Americans, Japanese Americans do it. Last year I happened to be attending a festival in Dakar in West Africa, the first festival of Negro arts. And one of the most interesting things to me was a large number of American school teachers, businessmen, and professional people who had journeyed all the way to Senegal in West Africa to spend a week participating in this festival. I think this is an index to the new sense of security which the American middle class has vis-a-vis Africa.
Nowhere is this mental revolution more evident than among middle-class black youth. Past graduates of Negro colleges, such as Howard University in Washington, D.C., would hardly recognize the old alma mater now. Known in the past for its strict pseudo-Victorian traditions, Howard today is a hotbed of student and faculty unrest, militance, and activism. Though Greek letter groups and practices remain, there is less old-fashioned snobbery than before, as equalizing black consciousness grows on campus. Gone is the fabled pine-board complexion, straight-hair favoritism of some sororities. Girls of every hue and hair texture are acceptable now. For 100 years or more, black colleges have been the main springboard to middle-class status for aspiring Negroes who are barred from most white institutions by law, prejudice, or lack of finance. Today, however, many of these students have deliberately chosen black schools over the white, often as an expression of racial pride and militance.
I think in the years past, the student body and the faculty at Howard weren't particularly passive. I just think they were scared to death. I believe that in the past, the university administration was very oppressive. And at the slightest movement out of line by any faculty or student, that student was kicked out, or he was censored in some way.
You have the Uncle Toms, or rather the Dr. Thomases, who sort of bow down to
young sociology professor Dr. Nathan Hare, recently fired by Howard for his militancy.
They said that if we don't bow down, we won't get tax money, whereas they give far more money to the white schools, and much of it for research on the Negro. And then we have decided now that they've been studying the wrong man, and they gave $40 million to Berkeley to study the Negro. We want $40 million to study the white man, because that's the covered, and so we are going to try to reject some of these outlooks. We pay taxes just like the whites do, as much as we're allowed to make money. So what you have then is a sort of colored cracker system of administrators who don't want persons to breathe. They can't do anything until the white schools have done it. For example, Malcolm X was not allowed to speak at Howard the first year. He was invited by students. Then Yale invited him, University of Michigan, and others, Harvard. Then the next year, Howard invited him, but they hastened to put out a public relations release saying that now we've joined the ranks of Yale and Harvard. And of course, they had somebody to debate him.
Black collegians at predominantly white schools, such as Columbia University, are also caught up in the mental revolution. Gone is the timid, please tolerate me attitude of some Negro students of yesteryear. Today, it's, I'm here, I'm black, and I'm beautiful, baby. Afro-American societies have sprung up, and Afro-American students are openly challenging the educational concepts and practices they encounter.
A lot of the students at this university, particularly the black students, have been very concerned about the fact that we aren't included in any way in the curriculum. It's easy to take a course that covers 50 to 75 years of American history and not learn a thing at all about what black people have done or what role they've played. The fact that there were many black troops that fought in the Civil War, or the role that they were involved in political action during Reconstruction, or the exact nature of European imperialism during several centuries. A lot of these things just aren't covered. And we've recently tried to get the administration here at Columbia to just set up a study to concern itself with the problem. The university, in fact, has really refused to discuss it in a reasonable manner. Now, the university pretends to be interested in an academic approach to things, to sitting down and studying. They don't like the fact that people go and burn books in front of Ferris Booth Hall. But the university isn't really willing to sit down and solve any of these problems. And that this is something that, in the long run, is going to contribute to more problems. There are going to be more incidents of people burning books if they don't start burning buildings in the near future. Unless the university is willing to really study the discontent that leads to students to the fact that white students and black students don't have a real appreciation of this culture that we talk about. History courses, whether they deal with American history or history of the world, don't include what the accomplishments of non-white people. And it's about time some changes were made.
For candidate Roger, you cleared across the seat bound between the runways and landing taxiway Lima. Channel 153 is clear for takeoff, runway 13 left.
Thus, the central theme of middle-class Afro-Americans today is that despite surface gains, they are hurt, embittered, even furious at the continuing exclusions and discriminations they meet in jobs, promotions, housing, and other opportunities which they know their qualifications or incomes would automatically admit them to were it not for prejudice by whites, however subtly applied. They are insistent upon recognition and respect as human beings of pride and dignity equal to any others. And they are fed up with white paternalism. They want to run their own affairs. But what of the future? Where does the black middle class go from here? What roles will it play within the general American society?
I think that the basic function of the middle class oriented black American is to be the interpreter of not only the diseases which mark and mar our nation's life and the life of our culture and our world, but to be the recreative agents for the reconstruction of our society. Actually, the greatest pool of unused talent in this nation is the unused talent of black men, of the greatest candor as well as competence. Now, the great tragedy lies here in the fact that the people who are the controllers of the system need this candor and competence combined in order to preserve the best in their system. And what they will do is to get carbon copies of white men and not the most competent, candid black people who are really the most creative ones in our society. These people are the ones that should be the consultants for the building up of our society. This is a unique role of the black middle class. There are other roles all along the line, creative roles for all elements in the black community, but certainly these are the people who are presently the most valuable people potentially in our society today.
It's there. We've got to start playing back, and the Negro male is beginning to get this feeling, especially the younger Negroes. I think this is so beautiful to watch these young kids who, you know, if you listen to what they're saying, and they are saying something.
What do you plan to do, or what would you like to do? I guess this is an experimental program lasting about 6 months. What would you like to do after 6 months?
We'd like jobs. We want damn good jobs. We don't want that cotton washing and, you know, we want damn good jobs. I don't mean nothing. It doesn't got to be a white-collar job or nothing like that, but we just want damn good jobs, something that will grow, some type of job that has a future, some type of job that means something to you. You know how important a job is if it means something to you. You know, you can grow on it.
Once you get a job, then what?
Then I can, you know, I can sort of see myself if it's a good job and I feel that I can grow on this job and be motivated by the system that they have on this job, whatever it is. I can see the next 10 years maybe, you know. I can see raising a decent family, you know. I can see being somebody, you know. And I can get used to the idea of being called Mr. Smith instead of Hey and Boy and all them other names, you know, that they call us, you know. Yeah, you know.
Whether they live in the crowded ghetto or commute to work along with whites from the suburbs, Afro-Americans, particularly the youth, are hardening in their assessment of white attitudes on all levels. They are skeptical. Even the goal of integration itself now comes increasingly under question. And the tragic assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King has inevitably added to the distrust, the disillusion.
We're in a period in which some degree of acceptance in some situations is given to Negroes by the white middle class as friends, neighbors, equal associates. But this is something that is just beginning. I think the large bulk of the middle class will have its sense of racial identity increased as the years go on, that it will tend to ally itself with the Negro masses to an even greater extent than it has in the past. I think the whole concept of black power and black nationalism generally is not just going to involve the youth who shout stridently or the youngsters who go into militant action. You see, I take the position the ghetto is not going to disappear. It's going to be here for a long, long time, the segregated Negro community, because America has not made up its mind to desegregate its cities. a large proportion of the people who live in the ghetto. They will be giving services in the form of owning stores, of being doctors, dentists, lawyers, school teachers, social workers. And I think that increasingly, rather than that group splitting off, it will work in common cause with the so-called masses within the community.
Thus the challenge is posed. As black people on all levels continue to cast off previously crippling attitudes toward themselves and others, they eye the affluent mainstream of America with both critical and determined scrutiny. However irritating or inconvenient it may seem to others, black people living in the midst of the wealthiest nation the world has ever known no longer measure progress in terms of how much better things may be today than yesterday. Their vision is focused on how much further there is yet to go before they too share unhindered in the great American dream. For share they will, or the dream itself may well be jeopardized for all. Set. Hey. Hanging in the air, therefore, is the ominous question. How much longer can America evade honoring its most basic and pressing commitment? Will the younger and the more militant be forced to continue losing faith in the promise of a truly equalitarian, multiracial America? If so, then the troubles we've recently seen could be but a prelude to national disaster.
I think we have to be very realistic about it. But I don't think that we can, I'm not an alarmist by any means, but I don't think we can minimize the situation in any way. It's something that all of America needs to look at and think about very seriously, because you can bet that the rest of the world is looking at America and trying to evaluate and assess our real sincerity, you know, when we talk about brotherhood and equality.
This is NET, the National Educational Television Network.